July 9th. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geeknights. Tonight, hard drive failure.
Let's do this.
Well, I gotta say, it was a pretty relaxing and generally awesome weekend.
Until the last minute.
Until I went to the emergency room.
Yeah. That can never be good.
Yeah, well, we had a good weekend. We didn't go anywhere. We just finished Challenger on Fire, mostly. We still have some to do, and
Yep.
we're getting ready for con season. That was our last free weekend. So it's like 9 o'clock, and I'm making lamb burgers, and I'm not paying attention. I'm chopping up some onions. I'm chopping them up stupidly, and I hit my finger with the knife.
Good job, Mr. Cut Yourself there.
Yeah, quite deeply, too.
Yeah. So, of course, Rim cut himself. Oh, we gotta take him to the emergency room, because otherwise he'll just bleed to death all over the floor.
Well, I'm standing there looking, because it's just the tip of my pinky finger. So I'm holding it back together, and I'm thinking, all right, is this something I can deal with on my own? And then I pull it open, and I pull off the whole front of my pinky finger.
Yeah.
All right. So, great. Let's just go to the emergency room.
Well, it's not something where you gotta call 911 to get the ambulance. I mean, he cut his finger. You don't call the ambulance for the cut finger. Especially since you have to pay the ambulance fee.
Well, I wouldn't have, but...
Yeah. But anyway, I'm sure many people would have, but we, being sane, would not have called the ambulance for a cut finger.
Yep. Well, I mean, my insurance would have covered it. It's more that I hate calling the ambulance unless I really need to.
Exactly. So, we're just going to drive to the emergency room. Now, there's an ambulance that drives by our house crazy fast all the time. He's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we've never actually seen his face.
No, but we hear him drive by and we see him drive by.
We can tell him apart from the other ambulances because he's going about 70 or 80 down our street.
Yep. So, we figured there's a hospital right next to our house, and we figured that's where he was going to and coming from. So we go over there, and it is a hospital, but it's only a rehab kind of hospital. And
it was like Dominion Tank Police. We only treat healthy people here.
Right, so they didn't have an emergency room there.
Luckily, we ran into some guy on rehab who told us where some other emergency room was.
Yeah, they were all like walking around in a circle around the hospital, so we just drove through the mass of people.
It was kind of scary when Scott pulls up to these people, and they kind of swarm around the car when he opens his window, and they all start talking at once.
Yeah, but they told me how to get to the emergency room.
Yeah.
So we went, and...
well, the nearest emergency room to our house is quite a ways away.
It's on the other side of the Hudson River.
The only other option is to drive all the way up to Poughkeepsie.
I'm thinking maybe they should set up places that are just emergency rooms and not a whole hospital.
The only reason they don't, I think, is that emergency rooms are the least profitable and most pain-in-the-ass part of any hospital as it is. No one would willingly run one in and of itself.
Yeah, of course, it's the most necessary part.
Yeah, I would say so.
The most important part, yeah. Maybe that's the ticket, is to not have socialized medicine, but just have socialized emergency rooms.
Yeah,
just make them all over the place.
I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. If it were a system where if they only treated sudden illness...
Because, I mean, it's already sort of socialized in that they're forced to serve people, right? So now we could have private hospitals for all the, the long-term, the cancer treatments and things, that actually cost a lot of money. And those places can actually be profitable. And the unprofitable part that we really need badly, the emergency room, we can just make it happen in every city.
Anyway.
So we find out where the emergency room is, and it wasn't so easy to get there. We made one wrong turn. We had to turn around on this road.
Down that cursed road.
Yep.
See, well before, we often would try to drive over to Newburgh thinking, all right, everyone says there's great restaurants over here, and we're sick of eating at restaurants on this side of the river. Let's go eat somewhere. And every time we've gone over there, we end up going down this one road. Well, technically up this one road. And as far as I can tell, there is nothing on that road anywhere. If you go down that road, there is never going to be a single useful place of business until you get to New Paltz, like an hour away.
In which case, you will just find many alcoholic places of businesses. Yes, places of businesses. So we turned around the other direction on that road, and we found the hospital because we followed an ambulance there. And I was, of course, I know that waiting in emergency rooms, especially if you're not dying, takes a long time.
Now, I also know this, partly because I work in hospitals every day.
Yep. So my plan was drop that Rim off and go home, and then Rim would call me when he wanted to come back. So I drop him off, and then I start leaving, And then Emily calls me, and she's like, oh, they took Rim right in. And I was like, really?
No, they did. They took me right away because I was bleeding, and they said, all right, go right in there. We're going to triage you. They triaged me. Then she left. Then another person came in. They took all my insurance information. Someone else came in. A third nurse came in, asked me a bunch of questions. They did a few more tests to make sure I wasn't dying or anything. Asked me a couple questions about my wound. And then they said, and I quote, a doctor will be right with you. It won't be long.
Yeah. So because they took Rim right in, usually when you're waiting at the emergency room, you're waiting in the waiting room. And it takes forever before they let you inside. But once you're inside, usually within, like, unless, a crazy dying person comes in, you're only going to be waiting inside for at most 15, 20 minutes before someone does something to you.
Thus, it begins. So I'm sitting there reading my book thinking, all right, any minute now, any minute now, any minute now, any minute now. No one has walked by and the hallway's dark.
I was waiting in the waiting
now.
room with Emily, and there was not so many other people there. And eventually, like, the receptionist went home. And see, I'm sitting there thinking I should just go back home. It's going to take longer, right?
You bought into the sunk cost fallacy.
Well, I didn't buy into the sunk cost fallacy. I had another made possible fallacy that I was falling to. I knew the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is I already waited an hour. If I, by going home, I'm basically losing that hour. And that's wrong. That's bullshit because every minute I stay is another minute I lose. Even though I already lost that hour, I can't get it back, right? But the fallacy, might have been a fallacy that I was falling to, was that, okay, every minute that goes by, the odds of Rim appearing, doctored up, increase. I really don't want to risk having to go home and then turn around while I'm on the way home, thus losing more time.
Yep.
So it was basically I was assessing the risk of losing even more time in the future by going home because that risk of losing even more time increased as time progressed.
Meanwhile, I'm sitting there making my own calculations in a separate room, and because I have a real injury and there is a time limit where good treatment can be applied, that they can't just ignore me like they normally do to people in emergency rooms. I could go on and on about the techniques they use to ignore you in the emergency room. My primary advice to you is, unless you are dying or suffered a severe injury, don't go to an emergency room. Wait till the next day and go to a clinic.
Yep. But basically, waited there for many, many hours.
So after the first hour, they come and get me and they say, all right, we're going to move you to this room. And they wouldn't really say why, so they move you to another place. And another hour goes by and Emily comes in and she basically kind of snuck in through the locked door when someone else walked in. And there's really no one around, and she basically says, yeah, apparently they lost you. You see, they didn't tell me, but the reason I waited in that room for an hour was that they forgot I was there. And they tried to not let me know that they had forgotten I was there, so they moved me somewhere else and made something up. So then they say, all right, someone will be with you shortly because you're bleeding. All right, we wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait, and eventually I look at my finger, and I'm talking to Emily, and her sister knows a lot about this, and we're pretty much starting to feel like it's going to be too late to get stitches anyway, at which point there's no reason to be at the doctor. They're not going to help me.
Yeah.
So eventually I get up, and I kind of walk out into the main area outside of the emergency rooms, and the nurses are all kind of walking around. There's like 12 of them, and they're all pointedly avoiding eye contact at all costs. So eventually I kind of stare at one. I just pick one, this guy who's sitting there, and I stare at him, not moving. And he knows I'm there because he glances up once. And eventually he realizes I'm not going to stop staring at him. So he looks up and he asks very pleasantly, can I help you? And I basically said, if there's no chance of me getting treated anytime soon, can I just get like a butterfly bandage or something to put on myself and just leave? And then all the other nurses come over and they basically said no.
You can't get a bandage.
They basically were elated. Yeah, you can leave if you want. But they balked at giving me the one thing I wanted, a butterfly bandage to kind of suture the thing myself. Eventually, I convinced them to give me a Band-Aid so I wouldn't bleed.
We have Band-Aids. We don't need their Band-Aids.
Well, I didn't want to bleed on your car. So they grudgingly give me this one Band-Aid, and then they tell me to get out. So I left, and I come out, and I explained to Scott that, no, I didn't get treated. Fuck this hospital.
See, people complain about the healthcare system, and they say, oh, it should be private. Oh, it should be public.
Or they
it
say,
should be this. It should be that.
Look at
know
those
what?
countries with socialized medicine. You have to wait in lines to get medical treatment.
Yeah, you know what the problem really is? Is the hospital is incompetent. It doesn't matter if we pay the hospital with money out of your wallet.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter
out,
if we pay the hospital with tax money. The problem is the hospital sucks ass.
I
Either
point
way.
out that and not to sound conceited or anything, but the way the world is, I have super good health insurance, and I'm relatively wealthy.
The insurance would have just paid it. There wasn't a problem with the insurance.
Not only would
Even
the insurance...
if Rim was Bill Gates and he had $1 billion going to this hospital, it would have been treated like shit.
Well, here's the thing. If I was Bill Gates, I would have known better, and I would have flown to my personal doctor.
That's what I'm saying. But, no matter how rich, Rim could have been like an executive from New York City or something who is like $5 million but is not famous or well known and just walked into this hospital and he would have been treated exactly the same way. It's total ass.
But it's kind of fair in a sick way. Everybody gets treated in the same shitty level of service.
Yeah, I can understand the fact that, okay, if someone else comes in with something more serious, you treat them first.
Yeah.
It's possible you have a run of bad luck. You just happen to cut your finger when 10 people have heart attacks.
And that's fine. You gotta, that's the...
That's acceptable. The main problem I have here, right, is that I was watching and only like 3 ambulances showed up. You're telling me there's less than 3 doctors?
There was one doctor. You realize
One doctor. So 3 people came in ambulances, and only one of them got treated, and 2 of them were suffering. There's insufficient number of doctors there.
But the problem is there's no money to pay for more doctors, and you can't predict the odds of people coming into the emergency room at night and all that business. What it really came down to was that
they didn't care.
They didn't really triage me properly because no one actually looked at my wound. If they had looked at my wound, they would have realized, wow, that just needs 2 stitches and maybe some antibiotics and a tetanus shot, and he can go home.
Yeah.
But they waited so long, and I didn't know much about this, but now I know that, according to the real doctor I went to today, if you wait too long to get stitches, like more than a few hours, it's too late. Now you can't get stitches, and now you're fucked. In fact, the real doctor I went to today told me that if I wanted to, I could probably sue the emergency room for failing to properly triage me and denying me the treatment that would have led to a better prognosis.
You should at least ask one of your free lawyers about it.
I don't really want to sue because I'll be okay.
You definitely need to make a stink at the very least.
Oh, I'm going to make a little bit of a stink, but my real gripe is with that specific hospital.
Yeah, but this isn't anecdotal evidence here, but definitely.
Oh, anecdotal evidence you speak of.
Yes.
So I skipped work today because I was still bleeding in the morning.
Wow.
So just oozing. It wasn't like super bleeding, but it was still bleeding.
Yeah.
So I go to just a normal walk-in clinic. It's actually a clinic designed more for poor people.
Yeah,
but
it's this place there's a couple of them around here. It's called Medicus, and it's just a place that you walk into, and they have normal physicians and nurses there. And
it's like a daytime emergency room.
Yeah, you can go it's not like an emergency. If you have an emergency, they can't really help you. But, if you have a cold or you need a prescription for a cream, you got a rash, anything normal, and you don't, you can just go there. And
See, the thing is, these serve the vital purpose. They're kind of the mid-range, because what I had was not a life-threatening emergency.
Yep.
But it was a situation that the proper thing to do was to go to a doctor and prompt treatment
but the
would
problem
result
is
in a much better
the Medicus
prognosis.
kind of place is not open 24/7.
The fact is, the only place open 24/7 was the shitty emergency room. And by the time you waited until morning, it was too late. Now, I do want to point out that way back, like a year and a half ago, the long story short is one of my teeth had this weird cavity underneath that no dentist had noticed. And one day, the whole front of the tooth just popped off while I was brushing my teeth.
Whoa.
In the middle of the night. I was home alone. To which I go, oh, fuck. What do I do?
Call the dentist.
So I called my dentist, and no one was there, obviously, but it said, in an emergency, call this number. And I called this other number, and they told me to come, and they paged the dentist, and he came and fixed me that night.
Yeah.
Because it was an emergency.
Yeah, that wasn't even as serious as the cut on your finger. I don't
Not
think.
at all.
Yeah, and they got a doctor or a dentist up in the middle of the night to come.
Granted, it was a private practice. The dentist did it willingly because I guess he cares, and because he made some money off of it.
Yeah, Rim's insurance was going to pay this hospital money. If the hospital's losing money, don't you think they want to take Rim in first? Sure, it's kind of, I wouldn't say that they should treat someone with insurance.
Yeah, because then you get the monster
wussy
syndrome, where you got to treat the famous politician instead of the poor kid.
You don't want it to be like Monster. You do not want to do that, because then, the person who's seriously dying will die while Bill Gates gets his, scrape, bandaged up. You don't want that to happen. But, at the same time, if the hospital would have had the one more doctor, they're thinking they're losing money with the one doctor they have there. But with the 2 doctors, they'd be able to treat some of these other people and maybe get some insurance money out of them.
Yeah, the problem is the vast majority of people who come to any emergency room don't have insurance.
I know. That's the other thing, is they need to find the law is if someone comes to the emergency room, they kind of have to treat them. They really need to make it some way where you can be triaged out the door. You know, I mean, Rim should have been triaged to stitches. There is no doubt about that.
Because all I needed was 2 stitches.
But
I would have been fine.
The problem is people who come in with a cold, they eventually get in. And people with a stomach ache that's not appendicitis eventually get in. They need to be able and allowed to just send those people home, and they'd be allowed to save a lot of money.
It's a complicated problem.
It is
Well,
very
we should probably do a show about this because I have some insights.
Sounds like we already did the show about this.
Yeah. Well, having worked in hospitals for a while now, I've learned a lot about how this works.
Yeah,
And
you should definitely make a stink to the local media or something.
I'm thinking about it.
Make the hospital have a bad name because I think that's the only way we can hurt them without
well,
suing them.
so I'm at this doctor today, and they say, yeah, it's too late to get stitches. And when I tell them the story of what happened, they basically stop and say, what hospital was it? And I tell them, St. Luke's. I went to St. Luke's. It's the only emergency room. And the nurse says, oh, well, let me tell you something about St. Luke's. And she spewed forth the anecdotes of all the problems they have had with St. Luke's and how she personally had a problem at St. Luke's once in the emergency room. And how someone basically almost broke his pelvis and they wouldn't really do anything.
What the hell?
Yeah.
How could a place like this be in operation? It's like Dr. Nick's.
Well, I've been to some emergency rooms. Remember way back when I got Lyme disease?
ZDI.
Way back, years and years ago, I caught Lyme disease. And I didn't know what it was right away. So I go to the hospital in the emergency room, and I'm like, I got 103 fever and a headache, and it's persisted for a day. I think I'm sick. And they ran some tests, and they made me sit there for 4 hours.
At least they ran tests.
Yeah, useless tests.
Oh.
The test didn't show anything. They showed me being in perfect health. And then they sent me home with a bottle of aspirin.
Wow.
So the next day, I went to a different doctor who said, you have Lyme disease. Here's some antibiotics. Go home. Yeah.
Maybe it's just that they shoved the shitty doctors in the emergency room.
But I went to another emergency room. It was just a different hospital.
Oh.
Maybe I was just lucky. I went into the other one, and the nurse is like, wait a minute, let me see your arms. And she looks at one arm, and says, let me see your knees. And I pull up one, and she's like, aha! There it is. You've got Lyme disease. Whoa, okay. What do I do? Take these pills.
Huh? Oh, well. All right. So, tech type news.
Yeah. The moral is my fingers hurt, and I got to hold it up, and it sucks, but I didn't die yet.
Yep.
And I got a tetanus shot, which I was kind of due for.
Yeah, too bad you didn't get tetanus.
Yeah, tetanus is double awesome.
It is.
I remember back when I had tetanus, that was a riot.
Yep. All right, so everyone's probably seen this story, and the headline is NASA buys $19 million toilet.
Wait a minute, NASA or NASA?
NASA, the regular NASA.
Okay.
Right? And everyone's like, OMG, our government is crazy. They waste money on bullshit, blah, 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 blah.
It's kind of like that apocryphal story about, NASA spent millions and millions developing a pen that would work in space, and the Russians just used a pencil.
Right. So, basically, this is not stupid like you think it is. The space station needs a toilet. People need to go to the bathroom.
What are you talking about? People don't pee.
Oh, right.
No one poops.
I forgot. And it has a toilet, but the toilet has some problems. You see, it doesn't really have a way to, hold you down while you're pooping.
Well, you can kind of strap yourself down, but...
Well, no, the current toilet doesn't have any straps or anything.
Wow,
You have to sort of push yourself towards the toilet with your arms or something.
Man, the one on the
Imagine if, you just floated upwards and your poop kind of came out.
Even worse, the poop would act as a propulsive force.
Yes, and also, what could you push against to squeeze the poop out of you? You need to push against something. You can't just push against yourself to make the poop come out.
Well, the poop will just come out, you realize. It'll be like a jet, though. It'll rocket you forward.
I know, and the poop, who knows what'll happen to it.
See, I do point out, though, that the space shuttle has straps.
Yes, but anyway...
Why didn't they just put some straps on?
Well, on the Russian side of the space station, there's a toilet, right? That's all not... It's basically almost the same as the toilet the Americans have, only it has straps, and it has separate hoses for everyone to pee in, so everyone has their own,
That's kind of nice.
Yeah.
But everyone shares the same pooper, right?
Yes. It's just... And the U.S. side had this toilet that was older and inferior.
So what, were the U.S. astronauts sneaking over to the Russian side, maybe bribing them to
I
use
have
the
no
toilet?
idea, but basically... NASA had two choices at this point. They're sending more people up to the space station. There's going to be 6 people up there instead of 3. So they need more privacy, more pooping, more peeing, right? And the current toilet wasn't going to cut it. So what are they going to do? They can either invent and develop their own toilet, Or they can just pay $19 million to the Russians to get the Russian toilet on their side. And that's what they did.
They could hold it in.
And it's not stupid. It wasn't a waste of money. If you agree that the space station at all is a good idea, which is not something I want to discuss right now, then you must agree that buying this toilet was the good idea, because it's either $19 million for this toilet, a lot more money for a new toilet that can invent one, or the shitty old toilet, which doesn't cut it.
Well,
Those are your three choices.
People always say, yeah, we went to the moon in the 60s, and now we got this crap. What's going on? How come we're so much worse now? Why can't we go back to the moon? And people seem to forget the sheer amount of economic and mental power and just... It took so much to get to the moon and to do the things we did back then that the nation really isn't prepared to put that amount of effort toward anything right now.
Yep.
Especially when we've got
plus think about it. Every
wars
guy
going on.
Every American, right, that they spend researching how to make a better space toilet is not researching how to keep this rocket from exploding.
Nah.
Same guys. They're all NASA scientists researching. They all do the same shit.
Not that NASA... I have mixed feelings about NASA. I'm not going to say they're the greatest organization in the world.
No,
but at the same time,
they're very government, bureaucratic, inefficient, etc.
But at the same time, I'm not going to pretend that they're the worst organization in the world because they've accomplished a lot. I mean,
just not recently.
Think about the enormity of what they did. They sent human beings to the moon and back, and it worked multiple times.
Yep. So
that's crazy.
Anyone who reads this headline and is like, rabble, 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 you're an idiot. Unless you want to argue about, the space station being a stupid idea, in which case, I don't know if I agree with you. We'll see.
All right. One more thing. 19 million, right?
Yep.
So 19 million for a thing that's going to make the space station much better and last a long time and generally make pooping nicer. I'm all for anything that makes pooping nicer.
Yep.
I'm not. This is a rhetorical question. I'm not going to expect you to answer it. But I ask you, all of you out there, how much does one cruise missile cost?
They're like they're
how much?
Aren't they like $1 million each?
How much are we? How much is the United States spending in Iraq? I don't know.
See, but the same people who would say this is dumb would also say Iraq is dumb. They say we shouldn't be spending money on either of those things. So
yeah, well, we shouldn't be spending money on anything. That's their problem.
Yeah. Well, I sort of agree.
You know what we should spend that money on?
Emergency rooms in every city.
Fuck yes. Anyway. So I'm sure you are all familiar with CAPTCHAS, completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart.
Yeah, basically, when you sign up for a website and it says type in the letters that you see in this picture. The point of that is that only a person can look at the picture.
The point of that is that?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Only a human being can look at that picture and figure out what the letters are.
Well, that's the theory.
A computer can technically do it, but it's very difficult. And depending on the image, it's even more difficult. So, even if someone was spamming, and even if they had software that could figure out what the words in the picture are and type them in, it would be so computationally intensive that they'd need a supercomputer to do it with any speed.
Well,
so even if it doesn't stop spam, it slows it down significantly.
See, now, while that's true, there are a lot of...
That's the theory.
There's been a lot of arms race action going on here. Because on one hand, CAPTCHAs were developed, but at the same time, OCR got better.
Yep.
And you could make computers that could figure these things out pretty easily.
So they got to make trickier CAPTCHAs that then... I hate it when you see a CAPTCHA that I can't even tell if it's like a C or is it a U that got turned sideways because it got bent, and then I type it in wrong, and then I got to type it again.
Even worse is the fact that
people.
The CAPTCHA solving itself is not the real issue the spammers had to solve. Because I'm not going to get into all the theory or details about this, but there is something called side channel information. Or basically, if you're trying to hide information from someone, you have to be aware of the fact that information gets out through other channels that you might not anticipate. Like, say I'm trying to keep Scott from reading one of the books in my room. All right, so I duct tape that book shut. Now Scott sees that one of the books has duct tape on it and wonders why I duct taped that book shut. Or say you're trying to hide the fact that you go to a certain website, so you encrypt all your traffic. Oh, but you can look at logs on routers and see that your IP address was talking to that IP address, even if you can't know what the data was. Things like that. And the deal is really that with CAPTCHAs, you could figure them out through means that had nothing to do with the CAPTCHA itself. Like, maybe there's only a limited number of answers, and you can brute force it.
Yep, some people actually have the full-on super CAPTCHAs, which are random, and they make images on the fly, but A lot of people just have like 3 or 4. They have the same one over and over or something like that.
And even the ones that generate on the fly, a lot of people have done them stupidly. Like, the alt text will be the thing that's supposed to be there.
Yeah,
or
good job.
it just shows a picture, and you can just correlate the file name to one of the known CAPTCHAs solved.
Good job again.
Also, you can very easily just make a fake porn site and trick people who want to see your porn into solving CAPTCHAs for you and then saving the responses.
Oh. That's
Regardless of how they've done it, however, someone has broken, apparently, the CAPTCHAs used for Yahoo and Hotmail email. And as a result, lots and lots of Yahoo and Hotmail email accounts are suddenly being made and spamming the living fuck out of people.
Well, I actually read, this actually reminds me of something I saw recently that is a really clever way of stopping spammers without CAPTCHAs, which also, by the way, inhibit blind people. What you do is you make a form, right? And when you make a form on a web page, I don't want to get into this so deeply, you make fields, and there are different kinds of fields you can make. You can make text fields, radio button fields, checkbox fields, pull-down fields, all that sort of stuff, right? One kind of field you can make is a hidden field, and a hidden field has some information in it, but the person filling out the form doesn't see it, but when you click the submit button, that information gets submitted, and it's very useful for programmers, and people who fill out forms don't really need to know about it. Well, the thing is, a lot of spammers, the way their software works is it looks at the form not from the perspective of someone sitting and looking at the web browser. It just looks at all the fields in the HTML and fills them out. It also sees that when there's a hidden field, it doesn't fill it out. What if you took a non-hidden field, like a text field, right? But you made it so the user can't see it with some CSS
or
something
even
like that.
You make it so they can see it, but the text above it says, don't write anything here.
Yep. And then a spam bot will automatically, like if you call the field address, the spam bot will automatically fill that in pretty much every time. And now, whenever you get someone submitting the form with the address field filled in, you know that a human being didn't fill it in. You know that a spammer filled it in. So you just ignore that one.
Or an idiot.
But if you make the form field disappear with CSS so that people can't see it, the only way that was filled in was by a spammer.
Of course, they could just escalate the arms race and look at the CSS to figure out if something's visible or not.
They could, but there are tricky ways of hiding the CSS from them and such.
True, there are.
With JavaScripts and things.
The reason I brought this news up is that there is a fundamental problem here that is well below this issue, yet it is the real problem. I also want to point out that Google Gmail spam filtering works almost 100%.
Yeah, I don't understand why people still have a problem with spammers. I mean,
we get a spam a second to the Geeknights account.
I mean, if I was someone like Google running email servers, I would want to stop spam because that saves me money in bandwidth and such, and storage. But as a user, I have a spam filter. It works. It works 99% of the time. What's my problem? I don't really give a shit about spam.
Well, the other thing is I tend to, and I know some people disagree, but when it comes to blocking undesirable content, I've realized that there's so much content on the internet that I'm willing to miss something for the benefit of not having to deal with the crap. I'll block things with a wide brush. If 1 out of 1,000 emails that comes to me, or even 1 out of 100 that I might have wanted gets blocked accidentally, that's worth it. I'm willing to not get that email.
Yeah, all right.
But the real issue here, the real problem, the only reason this happens is because of the Windows machines that are compromised by Trojans and spyware and the malware. Because the only way this works is if you hit Yahoo or Hotmail or whoever from a million different IP addresses. That way, sure, they figure out someone's a spammer and they block the IP address, but there's a million more people spamming. You can't tell who's a spammer and who isn't because pretty much a good portion of the Windows machines on the internet are compromised. You can't do it based on IP address. If you knew at least 99% or even 90% that IP addresses could generally be trusted, then it'd be really trivial to blacklist bad IP addresses.
Yeah, but what do we do when we go to IPv6 then?
IPv6 is a whole different beast I'm not getting into.
I know, that's what I'm saying, though. If we want to go that way, then IP address blocking doesn't work. But I do agree that the compromised Windows machines are the core of all the other problems. And if we fix that one, everything will be good. Actually, if everyone switched to Vista, which so far has proved to be fairly secure, even though annoying, a lot of this shit would go away.
Yeah. So think of this. Spam is not caused by anything other than people, maybe like you, who have a Windows computer and don't keep it secure. And if you think that this is a far-flung threat, I dare you to install a program called Wireshark, run it for an hour, and see if anything interesting is in those logs.
I don't know how many people will be able to read those.
Well, I installed a Windows before I wiped it out and installed a new Windows when I built the new computer. And I installed a bunch of wares, partly as a test. And with one exception, every single piece of wares I installed had horrible spyware and horrible spam bots built into it.
Awesome.
They didn't get past my firewall, but I saw them there.
Awesome.
Things of the day. Fuck. That's all I got.
That's it?
That's it. Check it out. I'm sure you might have heard this before, but if you haven't, it's rather amusing.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that seem to cover this exact same topic, you know, the many uses of the word fuck. But this one seems to be like a pretty good one. So
It's concise, it's funny, it's to the point.
yep, you seen this, you seen them all. So fucking watch it. All right.
That was a really uncreative use of the word fuck, I must say.
Fuck you. So I read this article today that was actually pretty interesting. I don't agree with everything this guy says, but I agree with him, I guess, in spirit. The main point of it, you can read all the details for yourself, is that the computer mouse, the mouse that you move it around with your hand, 2 buttons, right? Except for the 2 buttons and the scroll wheel, if you have one, is not an input device of discrete input. It is an input device of sort of gradient continual input. It's the speed at which you movement and directions and vectors.
I'm going to make a pedantic argument, but I'm not going to follow through with it. But I point out that it actually is very discrete.
Yes,
removing
on the
pixels,
level...
pixels.
On the underlying level, it is a discrete input. On the user level, as far as your hand and your brain...
So conceptually.
Yes. We're talking about user interface here. We're not talking about technology. It is not a discrete input device. It is a gradual, continuous input device. Whereas the keyboard is a discrete input device. You push S, you push K. It does one thing. There's no more S or less S you're pushing, There's not hitting S harder or softer like there is on the PS2 gamepad where you can hit the circle harder or softer,
It should be that way. See, think of this. If we had keyboards that were analog sensitive to pressure, we wouldn't have to worry about picking a font size anymore.
I guess, yeah. That'd be all right. But anyway,
No, it wouldn't. That'd be
the
terrible.
point that he makes is that there are a lot of things the mouse is good for, like drawing on the screen, or scroll bars,
aiming,
or choosing colors, or aiming at an FPS, because all of those things require sort of these gradual, continual, analog-style inputs, It's not just aim, it's where do you want to aim? You can't do that with discrete inputs very well. It sucks to control an FPS entirely with the keyboard, right?
The first time I played Doom, I tried to use the mouse, but I didn't get it.
I used to play it with, I played Wolfenstein 3D mouse only. Then I did keyboard only. Then I did gamepad. Then I went back to keyboard only.
I remember playing Doom keyboard only.
I didn't understand the mouse-keyboard combination until I was playing FPSs on my Pentium 3. On the 486, I never played them properly.
I'm telling you, playing Doom without the mouse is a scary experience, especially if you can't strafe, because you didn't set that up.
Yep.
Because the
I
demon's
remember
coming
trying
at
to
you.
strafe in Wolfenstein 3D. You would hold down the 3rd button and move the mouse.
Yep.
And you'd let go of the 3rd button to stop strafing.
You can still do that even in Counter-Strike if you really want.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Nah.
Anyway, the point is that he makes in this thesis, I guess, is that there are a lot of things we do with the mouse nowadays that are better off, that are actually discrete, like saving. There isn't more or less saving. There isn't saving to the right or saving to the left. There's save. And
what about save as?
Yeah, that's another discrete input. But, and he points out, he makes a pretty decent argument that you're better off using the keyboard for discrete things because it's a discrete input for a discrete command. And you can have muscle memory. You can do it with your eyes closed. You can make a habit of it. You know, you can do it a lot faster. You don't need to clutter up the screen with extra buttons, etc., etc., etc. And in spirit, I agree with him. And then he proposes a solution that I don't agree with that much. But this is very interesting to read, and I always push people to learn keyboard shortcuts and use the keyboard properly, and I always yell at people when they use their computers inefficiently, so this is just more of that. You could be using your computer a lot more efficiently and doing a lot more things in a lot less time and having a much smoother experience if you learn to use the keyboard.
What it really comes down to is some things are discrete, but the mouse won't really hurt you. Like, for example, saving, yeah, just Control S or whatever your keyboard shortcut is, probably a better way. You don't need to think about it. But say you're in a program and you want to make a big edit change, or you want to run a filter or something. Usually if you're doing something like that, there's a lot of thought before doing it, and using the mouse, while it slows you down, at the same time, these aren't the kind of things you'll be doing just all the time, willy-nilly, without a thought. They're the kind of things you're thinking about, and opening up the filters or the effects menu with the mouse, and then seeing it and moving the mouse to your option gives you time to kind of process what you're doing, so you won't do things rashly. It's kind of the old thing of, if your computer was controlled by your brain, it would do nothing but delete documents and draw penises.
Yep. However, I will point out that saving is not something you should think about. You should save all the goddamn time, constantly.
Unless you want to save incrementally.
But then you have CVS or something.
Yeah, but sometimes you're using Word, and you're writing an essay, and you're worried the power's going to go out. So you want to
the
save...
new versions of Word do that already.
Oh, yeah, but what if you're using your old Windows 95 box?
Upgrade your goddamn computer.
And you got...
Spy bot machine.
Microsoft Works.
Then you're spamming me, so turn it off.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
Right. You can introduce the topic.
All right. We're not exactly sure 100% exactly where we're going to go with this topic, but it was brought up recently, and I listened to a podcast about it recently, so...
The smart one, right?
Yeah. So I figured we should talk about it in some context. Gonna talk about how hard drive, sort of, I don't know, damage to hard drives, hard drive failure, how they crash, how they keep themselves from crashing, what you should do about it, stuff like that.
It's kind of a cop-out, but we went long in the first half. You can't complain.
Yeah. Well, basically, you might know that when you use your hard drive, sometimes your computer might complain about it, or it might say, I'm repairing your hard drive. It wants to run ScanDisk or something like that. And what it's doing a few different things on a few different levels, but in general, your hard drive has a lot of stuff in it to help it keep all the data from getting fucked up, which happens all the goddamn time.
Yeah, I mean, you put data on the hard drive, and you don't really think about it, but the data's there. Your operating system, Windows, is there, or Linux, and your MP3s and all that stuff. And you think, even if you listen to all of our How Computers Work, that, all right, my files are a bunch of bits. Those bits are just written to the hard drive. There's a lot more to it. And luckily, your computer doesn't need to know a good goddamn thing about that.
Well,
your computer sends bits to the hard drive saying, I want these bits to go on this hard drive.
In the olden days, right, you would buy literally, this is before I even bought computers. I was, 70s we're talking here. You would buy a platter, and you would get like a 10 megabyte platter. Megabyte, people. And you would basically wire the platter on its, the platter would have a motor and like a read-write thing on it. And you would wire that into your computer. And it would be up to your computer to control the platter and like the logic of what to, all that stuff. Nowadays, your hard drive has a circuit board and a microprocessor attached to it. And the hard drive handles itself. It handles the platters on its own. And all your computer has to know is write this data, read this data, find this data, that sort of thing. And it just tells the hard drive what to do, and the hard drive handles the platters and that other level on its own. And that's what IDE is. It's integrated drive electronics. That's where we integrated the electronics into the drive. Before IDE, it sucked. Big time.
What it really means is that hard drives are interchangeable. Any hard drive will just work because all the logic, some hard drives use completely different methods to put data in different places or to deal with all their stuff internally.
Yep.
Your computer doesn't need to know anything about that.
Yep.
So I guess think of it this way. Your hard drive is doing a lot more behind the scenes than you might be thinking.
And your hard drive really doesn't tell you what it's doing so much, which is good and bad. It's good because, well, you don't really need to know that much. But at the same time, there are some things you really want to know because it is technologically possible that the hard drive could be telling you that it's going to die soon. It could be telling you that an error just happened and it fixed it. It could be telling you all sorts of things and it doesn't.
There have been attempts to make hard drives tell you these things that have met with mixed success. One particular example is a technology called SMART. We're not going to get into detail.
Let me just say that SMART doesn't work, basically.
Suffice to say, I used to really like SMART when I learned about it when I was young.
The idea of SMART is great. It's that your hard drive will tell you all the stuff that's going on, and your computer can monitor it and know it's going to crash before it crashes, and you can go get a hard drive and do all this preventative maintenance and stuff like that.
Yep, but in practice, SMART never really told you anything
Yeah,
useful.
half of drives that crash, according to a very good Google study, because who better to do a study on hard drives than Google, who has 1 million hard drives? Half of drives that crash, SMART was just saying everything's A-okay. That's how great SMART is. So
Yeah,
you can't trust it for
If you
shit.
want to learn more about that, there's a good episode on Security Now about it. I
Yeah.
suggest you check it out.
Yep. But basically, the hard drives, even though they don't tell you what they're doing most of the time, they are doing some pretty smart things behind the scenes to keep themselves from just fucking you over. One thing they do that's like the most important thing you should know about is that they have sort of like most hard drives now is they have a spare space on the hard drive. That's basically space they don't tell you about. And a hard drive is divided into sectors. And a sector is sort of like, think of it as the smallest unit a hard drive can deal with. You know, so if your hard drive has 1,000 sectors, it's going to have way more than that. Then it can write, you know, if it's going to write or read, it can write or read one sector at a time. It can read them really fast, but it can write or read a sector at a time. And sometimes a sector breaks or goes bad or something like that. And in the olden days, that was doom. That basically meant you lost space on your drive. If you had a 10 megabyte hard drive with 1,000 sectors and you lost a sector, you just lost space. And the data that was there, gone. Bad news. Very bad news. Nowadays, if a sector on your hard drive goes bad, the hard drive knows about it. It can deal with it. It takes the data that was there and puts it on another sector somewhere else. And you don't actually lose any space because it was reserving space for just this problem. If you get to the point where your computer actually tells you that there's a bad sector that can't be repaired, that means all the extra space to put the data from bad sectors in is filled up. And
That's
now,
bad.
That means your hard drive is going down. But of course, the only way you're going to find that out is with SMART, which might just not be telling you anything or might be lying.
Well, like ScanDisk will tell you.
Yep, but ScanDisk is doing a lot of things by asking SMART, and some things is not asking SMART. So it's a tough call. But yeah, there are basically programs that, you know, force your hard drive to do certain things to test it out, you know, and some of them will ask SMART things, but they won't trust SMART, and there are tools you can use like ScanDisk that'll let you know what's going on.
So basically, if your hard drive starts telling you for whatever thing you're using that it's got bad sectors, consider it gone and buy a new one immediately.
Yeah.
If your hard drive makes weird noises that it wasn't making before, buy a new one immediately.
Yep.
The only way to really protect your data is to buy a new hard drive, probably now before anything goes wrong.
And also a backup. Nothing can help you more than a backup. There are ways that tools you can use to, like, if your hard drive goes bad, to, like, you know, sort of give it the old, resuscitation, a little CPR, a little, what are those, defibrillator action, and get the data off of it. But you can't rely on that. You just use that in an emergency. You know, you should be only relying on a backup. That is your safest way to go. You know, and even a backup isn't 100% safe. It's just like 99% safe, which is safe enough.
Yeah, but I mean, bear in mind, a backup is not just a RAID. We talked about RAID before. You think, all right, what if I have a mirror? So anything I write to one drive is on the other drive. So if one drive dies, the other drive's fine. That's well and good unless something screws up the data that's being written to the drive. Or you accidentally type rm-rf star in a place you shouldn't have with permissions you shouldn't have had.
Yep. And the only way you can save that is if you had a backup in a hard drive that was unplugged sitting on your shelf.
Or data corruption, or viruses, or all sorts of problems you could have. Backups are the only way to save you.
Yep. All right, let's not keep repeating how backups are the only way to save you.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, I like to bring this up because this is something I've done at work and in my professional life for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
People always, if you delete a file, I know you've probably heard this before, deleting a file does not make it go away. Different file systems handle things different way, but basically when you delete a file, most file systems in some way say, all right, all those places where the data for that file is are now free to be overwritten.
Exactly, because remember, your file system, I'm not going to go into file system architecture, but basically, there's an area on your hard drive that says this file is over there, this file's over there, this file's over there. And then there's the other area where the files are. So when you want to open up, I don't know, readme.txt, you go to the hard drive and it says readme.txt is over there. And you go over there and that's where the text file is. When you delete readme.txt, it doesn't actually remove all the ones and zeros.
Because why? Is it going to write zeros to that place? That just takes more performance. It
Right.
slows your computer
All it
down.
does is it goes to the place that says readme.txt is over there and erases that. So now when you say, what files are there? It says, well, geeknights.wave is over there and, coolgame.exe is over there. And you say, what about readme.txt? It's like, what readme.txt are you talking about? But
the file's still there.
The file's still there. The zeros and ones that made up readme.txt are still where they used to be. The file system just doesn't know the file exists. It doesn't know where it is. But if you're smart and clever and you use various tools, you can go to the place where readme.txt still is. As long as it hasn't been overwritten yet, it's still there, and you can read it.
Now, of course, this depends a lot on the file system.
It depends on a lot of things.
And generally, the more you have used your computer since you deleted a file, the less likely it is that the data's still there.
Because the greater the odds are that the data has been overwritten with a new file or something like that.
Yeah. So, say you want to delete data securely. Well, all right, what if I just have a program that writes all zeros to the drive? And you know what? That works pretty damn well.
That works really well. Like, it takes a lot of money and a lot of time to get the data back if someone just wrote zeros to the entire drive, because you lost where the files are, where they begin and end. You're in big trouble.
But at the same time, because you just wrote uniform data over the drive, all right, there is still the trace of the data, because the actual data isn't real ones and zeros.
It's magnets.
Magnetic fields that are imprinted onto this magnetic medium.
So you had all these magnetic fields, and some
So
of them
you
were
had a pattern.
zero.
There's a pattern there. You applied a uniform pattern to it to obliterate it, but traces of that pattern are still there. And because it's digital, it's either a 1 or a 0. It's really not out of the realm at all to use fancy hardware or possibly even software in certain circumstances to figure out what used to be on that drive.
Yep, people have done it in labs and things, and if you write all zeros to your hard drive, they might not get everything back, but if someone wants to really badly, they can get your data off of that drive.
Now, of course, the real answer, I'm not going to get into the details. I don't want to go long about this, is DBAN. D-B-A-N. Just Google for that. You can put it on a flash drive, put it on a floppy disk, and basically it will write random or semi-random data in many passes over the data you want to get rid of, and will fucking delete fucking drive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there might be a way to come back from that, but it's not realistic. It's sort of like, yeah, you might be able to decrypt that 4096-bit key. Maybe.
See, that's another way. If you don't want to, if you can't, I guess if you can't is stupid, but instead of deleting data, one thing you could do is encrypt it with very strong encryption and then not keep the key.
Yeah, the thing you're trying to prevent here is, like, let's say I buy a new hard drive and I throw out the old one. I don't want someone digging up that old hard drive, or if I sell a hard drive on eBay, or if I leave my company and I had stuff on the hard drive there, and I don't want anyone to see what it was.
I deban any computer that I leave behind when I quit a company.
Yep. I just, I don't want people to get at data because I let a hard drive go out of my possession. And the two ways to stop that are to deban the drive after I let it out of my possession. By the way, deban stands for Derek's Boot and Nuke, because a guy named Derek wrote the software called Boot and Nuke, because you boot the software and then it nukes your drive.
Yep, it's pretty cool. I like it.
I like it a lot.
I've used it in professional capacity for a long time.
It's a very professional tool. The other thing you can do is just encrypt your drive. There are ways that you can have all the data on your hard drive be encrypted at all times, and the only way to get the data off your drive would be to use your computer with your password and your software that decrypts it. And if anyone stole that hard drive from you and plugged it into their own computer, they'd have basically an impossible time reading any of that data.
Of course, then we have to talk again about side channel information. Because by encrypting the data, or theoretically by using DBAN, because the data it writes could be construed as encrypted data. All right, now it's kind of like when I duct taped that book together. I don't know what's on this drive, but I know whatever it is, the dude encrypted it.
Yep. That's why you got to encrypt, and then if you give it to someone, boot and nuke.
Or more importantly, there are ways to encrypt that give you levels of deniability, where you can have nested levels of encryption or all sorts of fun stuff that is really beyond the scope of tonight's show.
Yes. The point is that hard drives, they're pretty fickle. They can get damaged pretty easily. And the data on them, it's actually not trivial to make it go away for real. I mean, I guess you could just ruin the drive, like if you smashed it with a hammer.
Yeah, but I mean, theoretically, you could get the data back, but that's kind of silly at that point.
That's not going to, yeah.
No.
It takes a lot of money and a lot of time to do it. See, if you make it more trouble than it's worth, then you pretty much win.
Suffice to say, just remember that when you delete a file, it's probably still there in some form for quite some time.
Yep. All right, now, what are some ways that you can, besides, keeping an eye on your hard drives and replacing them when they're about to crash if you find out they're going to crash or they have bad sectors, what are some ways you can make your hard drives last longer and not crash so much?
Well, one thing is very simply, you can use the power management of your computer to have the drive spin down when you're not using them.
Yep, that's a pretty big deal. I mean, a hard drive is rated to only turn on and off so many times, and if you turn it on and off more times than that, it's eventually it's going to near death.
Yeah, but at the same time, leaving it spinning all the time does theoretically introduce wear and tear.
Yep, I mean, the thing that's going to kill your hard drive most, the problem is that it's a motor, moving parts, things moving back and forth, stuff like that. So you want it to move as little as possible. So if you're doing something on your computer, or let's say you're not doing anything on your computer, just leaving it on while you go downstairs to get a drink, why should your computer sit there for hours with the hard drive motor spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning? You want to configure your computer to turn that motor off when it doesn't need to be spinning.
But at the same time, watch out, because there's the problem of, and this happened to me a bunch of times at IBM, we have a server that hasn't been rebooted or anything in years. It's just been sitting there, plugging along with OS 2. We turn it off to do some maintenance. The hard drive just doesn't spin back up.
Yep. Stuff like that happens. It's just the nature of motors and lubrication and stuff like that.
The real answer there is simple. If you've got a drive that you suspect there's anything wrong with it,
there's even a chance.
Get the data off of it before you spin it down or turn it off, because there's a small chance that it's not going to come back.
Another thing you got to watch out for, especially in laptops like to do this, is a laptop, because they want to save power, will turn off a hard drive pretty quickly, like maybe every 10 minutes, maybe even every 5 minutes if you're not using it. But what happens is you might end up in a situation where, your computer turns the hard drive off or spins it down. Then it spins it back up, and then it spins it down. Then it spins it back up, and then it spins it down. Spinning up and down constantly like that is not helping. It's hurting a lot. And your hard drive's life will be significantly diminished if you do that.
Yep, so that's really a fine line, and I guess in the end we can't give good advice about it.
Yeah, you need to sort of configure it based on your particular use case, to do this when the battery's using your laptop battery and do something different when your laptop's plugged in and stuff like that.
Here's a much bigger factor. This is probably the primary factor. It all comes down to heat. The hotter your hard drives run...
Actually, according to the Google study, the heat didn't matter so much.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, basically...
Because at IBM, heat was gospel, and anytime the cooling went out in the data center, hard drives would die for the next week or two.
Well, the heat does matter, right? Heat is important, but if your hard drive, it's going to make heat if it goes, because hard drives have fast spinning motors and they're spinning magnetic disks. There's going to be heat. It happens. If it gets over a certain temperature, it's going to fail because it's just too hot for the hard drive. It gets too hot, stuff's going to break down inside and it's game over. But as long as you're not going over the point of too hot for the hard drive, it you put it in like a tiny case and it's very poorly, then as long as you don't go over like the crazy temperature, it's probably okay.
However, a lot of people do end up going over the crazy temperature because they never clean their computers, they never dust them.
Or they have like a little shuttle case and there isn't a fan blowing over the hard drive and there's all sorts of wires in the way.
Or you live in a house with cats and you're a smoker and you've never opened your computer.
Yep. Another thing is that actually, if you keep hard drives too cold, Google actually found out that actually kind of makes them fail a little more often. But it's kind of hard to keep them too cold because hard drives heat up on their own pretty nicely.
Yep.
You'd have to literally put it in a freezer to make it, fail from being too cold. Another thing that the biggest thing that makes hard drives fail more often is just, did you buy a hard drive that's prone to failure? Now, hard drives are more prone to failure if they have more platters. Because basically a hard drive is a bunch of magnetic disks. And some hard drives have more magnetic disks than others. Like a 20 gig drive has one disk, and a 40 gig drive has two 20 gig disks, and a 60 has 3 of them, but an 80 has maybe 4, but you might be able to get an 80 that just has one 80 gig disk, and then you can get a 160 that's two 80 gig disks, and so on. And you have to really look up on the internet and research how many platters are in your drive, because a platter in a drive with one read-write head on it has a rate of failure. If you have 2 of those in your drive, you're basically doubling the rate of failure, because if either one fails, the whole hard drive is done. If there's 3 of them in there, you've tripled the rate of failure, because even though all of them are equally reliable individually, if any one fails, even if the other 2 still work, the drive is done for.
Well, notice how the same thing applied with RAID. Multiple hard drives that are rated in a way that isn't redundant, which I guess it's just an 8 at that point.
Yep.
Then if any one drive fails, your data's fucked.
Yep. That's why you want to have, hard drives with fewer platters in a RAID that is redundant. And then you're pretty safe, because your hard drives are not likely to crash, and you got the redundancy going on.
But at the same time, I've read numerous articles pointing to the fact that if you take hard drives that aren't designed to be used in a RAID configuration and use them in a RAID configuration, generally that puts a lot more stress on the drives than just typical normal use. If you make a RAID 5 out of drives that aren't quite prepared for that, you're probably going to increase your data safety overall, but at the same time decrease the total lifespan of all your drives.
Yeah, basically, another huge factor, and maybe the biggest, I'm not sure, is that expensive drives, the really expensive ones that people buy for servers, and the ones that cost more money, they're generally just better than the cheap ones. The cheap ones are made cheaply. They care less about them. They fail more often.
Don't buy that 40 gig Western Digital that you saw at someone's garage sale.
Yeah, because that's going to crash.
Don't buy used hard drives.
Don't buy the ultra discount hard drive on Newegg.
Yeah.
Go the extra mile, unless you don't care. But go the extra mile and pay the extra $20 to get the higher quality hard drive. It'll probably be faster, be better in quality, and last you a lot longer.
Now, you might wonder, why, Rim and Scott, if you not recommended a particular brand? And the problem is that there's no way to know which brand is absolutely better, because it's almost all anecdotal.
Yeah, and basically, in general, I personally, Western Digital and Seagate, awesome, right?
I have often used Seagate and Maxtor Diamond Maxes.
Well, Seagate bought Maxtor, so...
Yeah, but back before.
And Maxtor bought Quantum, so...
Of all the Maxtors that I owned, only one failed, and it was about time for that one to fail.
Yeah, I've never had a Seagate fail, ever, so it's just anecdotal, though. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
The thing is, I've always bought really expensive, fancy Seagates, and I know a lot of people who bought really expensive Western Digitals or really expensive Hitachi drives, and Hitachi invented that perpendicular, whatever, and they don't fail either.
But yet, at IBM, we'd buy the fanciest drives, and sometimes they'd fail.
Well, that's, it depends on how much stress you're putting them under. If you
Yeah.
take that fancy drive and put it in a normal desktop computer, odds are it's going to last a long fucking time.
The problem is there's no real good data on what brand is actually better.
And even if you have the best data, and it'll say, okay, if you buy this drive and use it for this purpose in this machine, odds are it won't fail for 5 years. But those are just the odds. You could lose. You're gambling. The odds are in your favor. Maybe it's 10-1 odds, but that could be the 1 in 10 drive that crashes. You don't know.
See, now notice that all the advice we've given really wasn't advice, because there were 2 sides of every coin so far.
Yep.
That's because the only actual answer is back your data up. Back it up.
Yep.
Back it up on something.
There is one thing you should keep in mind, though. Hard drives, if they have a problem, let's say you have a drive that was manufactured poorly, it's going to die in about a year or so. It's going to die pretty soon. If you have a drive that's lasted you for at least a year or more, there probably weren't any manufacturing problems with that drive. And you can bet on it pretty surely that it's going to last a few more years until it wears out.
It's kind of this plateau of reliability. And this applies to a lot of
It applies
products.
to cars, too. And
A lot of products.
Anything.
Anything you buy, if it doesn't fail immediately, it's probably going to last relatively long.
Yeah. It's like if you buy a washing machine and the washing machine works and it keeps working for months, then it was made correctly. And it's only going to break from wear and tear from using it a whole lot over time. It's not going to break from, they didn't wire that thing properly or something like that. Cars are the same way. If your car doesn't explode off the lot, then it was manufactured properly in the factory. And it's going to last you until the pistons start to wear out and, the cables break and the car wears down.
Granted, it's not quite as clear-cut with hard drives, and the curve is not as clean as anyone would like it to be.
Yeah, well, a hard drive is unique in that it is a mechanical device that moves a hell of a lot stays on all the time, a lot of the time, has a fast spinning motor, generates a lot of heat that isn't dissipated super efficiently, and it's just humming away all the time crazily. It's magnetic. It's a very fickle device.
I really look forward to the day when magnetic hard drives are only backups, and all of my real live data is on some sort of solid state non-flash medium.
Yeah, I like how you said non-flash because Flash has problems of its own.
Flash is awesome except for its numerous and manifold problems.
Yeah, I mean Flash is awesome, but you can only read and write it so many times, and then it's just done. And it's not like so many times till it wears out. It's like so many times set in stone. Like you can read and write one bit of the Flash like 5,000 times, and then it's done.
Flash memory actually does interesting things where it'll look at the data you're trying to write to it and try to fit it over data you're overwriting in such a way as to change as few bits as possible. But that has to be balanced.
That's mostly done in the software and not in the Flash itself.
Yes, because that has to be balanced by the speed of, because anytime you do anything like that, that's going to take time and slow down your data rate.
Yeah, so if you're trying to write something quickly, like let's say you're trying to take pictures really fast on your camera, if your camera doesn't have a lot of RAM, it's got to write to that Flash real fast, and it can't be bothered writing to the Flash in such a way to prolong the life of the Flash.
Luckily, for all its drawbacks, Flash is stupidly cheap.
And, it's not stupidly cheap, but it's pretty cheap and awesome.
Yeah, because I was looking, and because we just bought, actually, for Geeknights.
Compact Flash isn't really Flash.
Yeah.
Some of them have hard drives in there.
Well, yeah, but those are clearly set. They say they're micro drives instead.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking of getting one of those.
Yeah, they were. Compact Flash is an interface, not an actual,
Yeah, but they're pretty much either Flash or a micro drive.
Yep, pretty much. But
And
they go in the same slot.
Yep, and they both have pros and cons. But we just bought, actually, for Geeknights, a super fancy portable solid-state recorder.
It's going to be pretty awesome because now we can go to conventions and places, and this thing records like as good as our computer records. So when we're recording the show, we'll just simultaneously record to it. And if something goes wrong, we still have the show on there in perfect quality. And if we go to a convention and we want to record something, we just plug it into this thing and it records perfectly.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've recorded a bunch of stuff at cons before, but now we don't have to pull out the Mac, pull out the monitor, hook it all up, plug in the compressor,
we just
plug
take
in the
one
mixer.
wire and put it in a little black battery-powered box and push a button.
So we got to buy a gigantic pile of Flash for this thing.
Yeah, we do. It's a good thing, though, that you just record MP3, and then we can have a lot of audio and a little bit of memory.
Yeah, we'll play with it, because we might use Wave, too. Flash is pretty cheap.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, the sad thing is, this thing costs more than all of the other equipment we've ever bought for Geeknights combined.
It's a very professional piece of equipment, and I think it's worth it to have.
I almost wish I'd bought the more expensive one, but the extra $200 was not gonna...
No. Well, I do agree the more expensive one definitely was
It's
more.
clearly superior.
It was clearly superior. And so was the more expensive hard drive.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we're done. I'm gonna go nurse my wound and possibly eat some food.
I gotta eat some fucking food, goddamn.
Yeah. This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music.
Be sure to visit our website at www.frontrowcrew.com, where you'll find show notes, links, our awesome forum, a link to our Frapper map, and links to all the RSS feeds.
We say feeds plural because Geeknights airs 4 nights a week, covering 4 different brands of geekery. Mondays are science and technology. Tuesdays, we have video games, board games, and RPGs. Wednesdays are anime, manga, comic nights. And Thursdays are the catch-alls for various rants and tomfoolery.
You can send us feedback by email to geeknights@frontrowcrew.com. Or you can send audio feedback via audio. Just click the link that says Send Me an Audio on the right side of our website.
If you like what you hear, you can catch the last 100 episodes in iTunes or in your favorite podcatcher. For the complete archives, visit the website, which has everything.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 2.5 license. This means you can do whatever you want with it as long as you give us credit, don't make money, and share it in kind. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.